origins of my family are partly from the West Indies and partly from the South. I have a great-great-grandmother who was a former slave, and her name was Hannah Moses. And I have family that immigrated here from St. Kitts in the West Indies. And so our family often, it's kind of, I'm following in their footsteps of many of my foremothers of being an educator. So I had a grandmother who attended Hunter College and was a teacher. I had another grandmother who taught sewing in New York City public schools, and my mother was a teacher. And so I have many role models, and I have a good sense of self-esteem. But I can imagine that if a person did not have that kind of background and those role models, living in this current society, you might have a very damaged sense of self-esteem. And so, again, Black History Month makes us more aware of people who have achieved first. On my father's side of the family, we also have had people who have achieved first. My father was a New York City fireman for 25 years. He was one of the first African-American battalion chiefs. And after he retired, he went on to become the first African-American chief of the fire department in Peoria, Illinois. So firsts are something that I can feel proud of and have in my background, and it's a privilege to be able to share it with others. You know, a lot of people question, why is there a Black History Month? Why is the special time set aside specifically for Black history, and what about the rest of the history? And I think we need to first look at what are the roots or the background of the problem. And what we're trying to address, or the issues of concern, are things like prejudice and bias and racism. And those things exist in society because of underlying causes. That's the manifestation of the problem, but there are underlying causes, and they're deeply rooted in fear and ignorance and insecurity. So why we have a Black History Month is primarily to educate. We want to raise awareness and to address the foundations of the ignorance, and so that's one of the I think primary purposes of having a Black History Month. If you ask me what would be one word I use to describe Black history, I would, on Black History Month, it would be to say that it's been ignored. And it exists, but it's been ignored. And so what we have is an education system where we spend, let's say you took a world history class in middle school, you'd spend a month talking about Asian history and the contributions of the Chinese and the Japanese, and you'd spend several months talking about European history and all of the tracing, from the Vikings through the King of Versailles. But how much in that world history class do we actually get to talk about African history? Maybe a week. And that has implications for developing stereotypes or not addressing some of the stereotypes that are out there. So often our Black celebrities are artists or music or related to dance or even sports, but what we don't hear about is the full spectrum of contributions that Blacks have made to society. And so we need to hear about the engineers and the scientists and the literature that has been contributed to. My thoughts or reflections related to Black history is how fortunate I am Both in part because of a background where I came from a family where we had high achievers, that we had, my parents were college educated, their parents were college educated. I benefited from being a light-skinned Black person, so I don't face the prejudice of others that others have faced. So I recognize how lucky I am. And when you are, as a kid, learning about history, it seems so far away and so long ago. But now as an adult, I can realize that we only just fairly recently have won many of the civil rights battles. It is in my lifetime that it was illegal for a white person to marry a Black person in certain states. So these struggles are much nearer than I had thought, and I feel that I'm very lucky to have benefited from my privilege, in a sense, in my and my position, and having role models that I could look up to. And again, that kind of brings us back to the purpose of Black History Month, is by highlighting the variety of achievements that have been made by people of color, that it provides role models. So on the one hand, yes, it is addressing the lack of knowledge and ignorance of and raising awareness for white people, but it's also providing role models for Black people and maybe young children as well. My role model is Sojourner Truth. She was an abolitionist and someone who fought for women's right to vote, and she was a former slave, and she escaped slavery with one of her children and then went back to rescue one of her other children. And she is famous for addressing the courts in defense of women's rights. And back then in the 1800s, there was this perception that women were not strong enough and smart enough to be able to do the things that men could do. And she said, well, as a Black woman, I'm expected to do lots of heavy-duty work, and I have to do many of these masculine tasks. So surely, if I'm capable of doing that, and me as I'm a woman too. So her words were, "Ain't I a woman too?" So I'm able to do these things and if I, as a Black person and a Black woman, are able to carry these responsibilities and bear these burdens, shouldn't all women be able to do so, and shouldn't the women be able to have the same rights as men? So Sojourner Truth is one of my sheroes. So when I reflect back on my life, I feel like I have achieved some level of moderate success, but I hope what I have contributed most to is being a loving parent and a good neighbor and friend in my community. So I'm actually kind of proud of volunteering for my local ambulance corps, and I'm proud of having put four kids, sorry, I didn't mean to forget one, having put 4 children through college, and that they are launched into society and doing well. So I really feel that these kind of mundane things are often the building blocks of what makes society mesh well together. If I had the opportunity to meet any African American person of my choice, it would have to be President Barack Obama. I can remember crying when he was first elected in 2008, and because, again, talking about first, that to be for him to be the first African American president. And the sense that I had that finally there were some major and tangible strides in our society for recognizing and valuing the achievements of African Americans. I'm still working on trying to create a legacy in my life. I think I have a few more years left to be able to do so. And if I were, what I'm hoping to leave as a legacy of somebody who made the world a little bit better when she left it than she had found it. And I hope that I will have broken down some barriers or just changed for the better some perceptions. I hope that I hope to leave behind as an educator and here at SUNY Maritime College, that there will be dozens and dozens of students who have a love for business and finance and accounting and can say, I remember learning this in Professor Romain's class.